Hi, I'm Michael and I'll be your guide, sharing the history and the stories behind the places that shaped our world.
And I'm Emma, and I get to jump in with questions, thoughts, and the things you might be wondering too.
Our channel uncovers fascinating geography and history that shaped the world we live in today. Here we dive into incredible events, legendary places, and surprising connections you may have never heard of. We keep it light, rich in detail, and always interesting. In this episode, we are setting off across deserts, climbing over mountain ranges, and crossing vast oceans to follow something that transformed human civilization long before airplanes or the internet even existed. We are talking about the Silk Road, a vast network of trade routes that built empires, carried inventions and ideas, and changed the course of history itself. Ready to travel back in time and across continents? Let's begin the journey.
So, what is the Silk Road?
The Silk Road was not a single road. It was a web of trade routes that connected China, India, Persia, Arabia, and Europe. Merchants carried silk, spices, paper, and inventions, while ideas, religions, and even diseases followed along. The name came from the most famous product, silk, which was treasured in Rome and far beyond. Imagine a bolt of shimmering silk arriving in a Roman market, so rare and expensive that wealthy Romans had to get special permission to buy it. In fact, there was once a Roman senator who complained that silk was making Rome soft because people wore it instead of sturdy wool. But silk was only part of the story. This route carried life itself, cultures, languages, recipes, and even stories that still survive today.
So, how old is the Silk Road anyway?
The Silk Road began over 2,000 years ago during China's Han Dynasty. The emperor wanted allies and trade partners, so he sent an explorer named Zhang Qian westward. Zhang Qian's journey was not smooth. He was captured by a nomadic tribe, lived as their prisoner for years, and even married there before escaping to continue his mission. When he returned, he brought news of powerful horses in a distant land called Fergana. These horses, which sweated blood due to a parasitic insect, became legendary in China and were nicknamed heavenly horses. This opened a wave of caravan routes. Traders crossed the scorching Samarkand Desert, often traveling at night by the stars. Some carried small bells tied to camels because in sandstorms the bell's sound was the only way to follow the caravan leader. Cities like Kashgar and Samarkand grew rich as crossroads where east met west.
Wow, imagine being there and walking the road yourself. It must have been exciting.
Silk was just the beginning. Along the Silk Road, spices from India made their way west. Glassware from Rome traveled east, paper from China moved outward, and carpets from Persia rolled through busy markets. Precious stones, perfumes, and metals all changed hands again and again. There were also more surprising goods. Did you know that ice was sometimes carried in insulated containers from mountain glaciers to distant courts as a luxury? Or that ostrich eggs from Africa were traded and carved into decorated cups as status symbols in Central Asia? Imagine a dusty merchant holding peppercorns that had crossed mountains and deserts, or a buyer in Baghdad feeling the smooth weave of Chinese silk for the first time. Every object carried the culture of its homeland, and every trade built connections between distant worlds.
That's incredible. And I guess people traded more than just goods, right? What about ideas?
Even more valuable than goods were ideas. Along these same routes, Buddhism traveled from India to China, changing art, architecture, and philosophy. Islamic science and mathematics reached new lands, influencing medicine and engineering far beyond their origins. Papermaking, first perfected in China, spread west along the Silk Road. A little-known fact is that the secret of papermaking was captured in the year 751 when Chinese artisans were taken prisoner after a battle near Samarkand. Those prisoners taught their skills to local craftsmen, and suddenly, paper spread through the Middle East and Europe, revolutionizing knowledge. Imagine traveling scholars swapping stories in caravanserais, those fortified inns that dotted the route, where you could hear 5 languages in one night as people shared food, news, and ideas by firelight.
That is so cool. So, did these trade routes actually change whole cities and empires?
They absolutely did. The Silk Road made cities rich beyond imagination. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Baghdad became legendary for their wealth, their learning, and their markets overflowing with goods from thousands of miles away. Whole empires thrived by guarding and taxing the routes. When the Mongols under Genghis Khan and later Kublai Khan took control, they created an era called the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace. For a time, it was actually safer for a merchant to travel from China to the Mediterranean than it was to walk alone in a European city. Traders carried gold and silk without fear of bandits because Mongol patrols protected them. But danger always lurked. Raiders could appear out of nowhere, and sometimes entire markets would collapse overnight because a city fell to an invading army. One fascinating story comes from Merv in modern Turkmenistan, which was once one of the largest cities on Earth. When it was destroyed in the 13th century by the Mongols after a revolt, legends say the libraries alone took days to burn.
Wow, I never knew that. But it sounds like traveling those routes could be dangerous. What kind of dangers did people face?
Travel on the Silk Road was never easy. Caravans faced sandstorms that could swallow whole groups, or snowstorms in high passes where the only markers were prayer flags. Many travelers never returned. And then there was disease. When the Black Death emerged in Asia in the 1300s, the very routes that carried silk and spices also carried the plague. It spread from caravan to caravan, from port to port, eventually reaching Europe and killing millions. Merchants who had once been welcomed were suddenly feared as possible carriers. One eerie detail from history. In the siege of Kaffa, a trading city in Crimea, invading forces catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls, possibly one of the first examples of biological warfare. Traders fleeing the city carried the disease further west.
That's terrifying. So after all that, what's left of the Silk Road today?
By the 1500s, new sea routes changed everything. Ships loaded with silk and spices sailed directly between continents, bypassing the long land journeys. Slowly, the great caravanserais grew quiet, and once busy markets were left behind. The wind covered tracks, and sections of the Silk Road disappeared beneath shifting sands. But the story does not end there. Today, modern highways and railways trace parts of those ancient paths. In some parts of Central Asia, you can still walk into an old inn built for Silk Road merchants and see grooves worn into stone where camels knelt. Museums display coins from both Rome and China found together in desert ruins, proof of how far trade once reached. And here is something many people do not know. Some of those ancient rest stops are still in use today, serving truck drivers instead of camel caravans. The world has changed, but the roots remain.
That's amazing. I'll never look at a simple piece of silk or a map the same way again.
So next time you see silk, spices, or even a simple sheet of paper, think of the long journeys they once took and the lives they touched along the way. This was the Silk Road, the highway of history, where worlds met and the future was shaped with every step. Thank you for watching. OMG, I didn't know that. If you enjoyed this journey, like, subscribe, and join us for more incredible stories from around the world.
I can't wait for the next one!